What's going on, Dolphins? It is your boy Dillon, and I got a article today that I want to read to you from Omar Kelly. He is diving into an interesting topic that I would personally like to have more in-depth info on, which he provides, which is good, so we're going to get that. And then we're going to have a discussion. Now, what is the topic? The topic is, what can we expect from the Dolphins 2019 rookie class in year two? So their rookie class from last year, right? The 2019 class that was headlined by Christian Wilkins, taken in the first round. And you guys already know my perspective on that. I think after the first year, it's been pretty trash, if I'm being honest. Michael Dieter was complete trash. Isaiah Prince isn't on the team anymore. A few of the guys have, injury histories. Most of them didn't play. Christian Wilkins was underwhelming, etc., right? So, there's obviously a lot to be left there to be desired and a lot of improvement that needs to be made. Having said that, again, to be fair, it is only their rookie season. There was a lot going on. It was a, super young and inexperienced team because of all the moves they made, etc., with a brand new coaching staff, all of that. Now, some of those same issues are going to exist this year. It's almost an entirely new team with an almost entirely new coaching staff, new schemes, etc., etc. And it's actually even worse in some ways because their off-season programs have been, minimized because of the whole pandemic that is still continuing to rage. Anyway, so, there's a lot that they need to improve on. But, they certainly, as it goes right now, will have that opportunity since the, NFL is still pushing full steam ahead to get the season opened on time. All right, so let's see what Omar has to say. Also, let's note, as you guys should know, Omar Kelly's not somebody that I always agree with. He's a funny guy because half the time he will say things that are really smart and make a lot of sense and are super logical and that I agree with. But then almost immediately he will then throw out another opinion of his that completely contradicts what he just said. And it blows my mind. He does it all the time. He will literally, have opposing opinions on same topic and vehemently defend both of them. I don't know. It's crazy. Because it's, I don't know. Anyway, let me just get to this. It is hard to praise a rookie class when the group's top performers were two undrafted players. Interesting. The fact that Preston Williams and Nick Needham shined just as much as first-round pick Christian Wilkins last year and outperformed the rest of the Miami Dolphins' disappointing draft class indicates how much improvement is needed from these youngsters in year two. And that's fascinating, right? And so that is, an indictment on the draft class. Two of the undrafted guys, I would say that, in totality, Preston Williams and Nick Needham both performed just as well as, all of the guys that got drafted. I agree with that statement, right? When you look at, the overall impact that they had for their position and so on and so forth, right? Christian Wilkins didn't really do much. Again, yes, he was in the top whatever, or maybe led all rookie defensive tackles in tackles. But again, to me, that shows, especially when you look at the totality of the team and how things played out and how we were terrible in the run, got no pass rush, etc., etc., and that's his only stat. Well, to me, that just says that he was, about all it shows in his favor is that he's willing, certainly, to stay with the play and run downfield and get tackles, which is good, but the plays need to be stopped a lot sooner by him, especially if it's him that's going to stop it. He needs to be stopping it at or behind the line of scrimmage, not 5 or 10 yards past it. Okay, so, but anyway, so, look, Preston Williams, he showed some good things, right? He could be a Devontae Parker in that Devontae Parker model. So if we could have two of those kinds of receivers on the outside, the go up and get it, 50-50 jump ball kind of guys, that's great. But Preston Williams also, and he was showing a lot of potential, certainly more potential than I would say pretty much all of the draft class. He's definitely one of my favorite players that they picked up altogether from last offseason, right? But he tore his ACL, which is a significant injury for a player at his position. Now, is that to say that his career's over? No, by no stretch of the imagination is that the case. However, it is a significant injury, and it is going to be something that we will have to closely monitor. So even with guys like him, there are issues. And Nick Needham, I mean, like, you know, he's a solid player and played solidly last season, but he also had a ton of pretty significant and costly mistakes as well. So anyway, let's continue on though. Well, it's not wise to give up on a young player after one season. I totally agree with that, right? My general philosophy is that they need to be at least given their rookie contracts. Undrafted guys, since they don't necessarily have rookie contracts, same basic philosophy though. You know, if they last in the league long enough, they definitely need to be given like 4 or 5 years to be able to evaluate, because sometimes undrafted guys, you know, the first, you know, 1 or 2 teams that they're on, maybe they're not good fits and they don't shine, but then like that second or third team that they hit, it's a perfect match and, you know, blah, blah, blah. They have a vibe with the coach and then they break out, right? You know, shit like that does happen. So you got to give them time. So to be fair, that's absolutely right. The development of Wilkins, offensive lineman Michael Dieter, and linebacker Andrew Van Ginkel, he was a guy that was injured most of the season, right? On injured reserve, came back, and then to be fair, he did have some inspiring plays, but it was like a handful, and a couple of them came on special teams. People can like get upset at me about that if they want, but it's true. It's just factual. He made a couple splash plays, like 2 or 3 splash plays on defense, and then like 2 or 3 splash plays on special teams. And you can also like put words in my mouth if you like and make it seem like I'm saying that he's bad. No, I'm just saying that he's, so far what he's shown us is half the season he was injured, and then when he came back, he made a couple of, or a handful of splash plays. That's it. So the book is still open on him. If you couple those comments with, or really those truths, those realities, with my opinion that he should be given at least, 4 or 5 years to be able to prove himself, then obviously I think that the book is still open on the guy, and that he still certainly has potential to grow and develop. We'll see if that happens. Anyway, the development of those guys is the only hope that the 2019 draft class has of not being General Manager Chris Grier's most disappointing crop of draftees so far, because at this point it's possible that more of them will be released than those who become NFL starters, or even workable backups at this point, honestly. And remember, Isaiah Prince has already been released by this team and picked up by the Bengals. I haven't seen yet, but it'll be interesting to see if he includes Josh Rosen in this article, because I firmly believe that Josh Rosen does belong in that draft class, and in fact the 2020 draft class as well, or at least in that conversation. If my understanding is correct, we did end up getting that 5th round pick back, I believe, from the Cardinals, so we did recoup it, but we gave up last year's 2nd and a 5th round pick from this year in that Josh Rosen trade. Anyway, here's a look at what all of last year's rookies, drafted and undrafted, contributed in 2019, and an assessment of what's expected for these players in 2020. So obviously he starts with defensive tackle Christian Wilkins. Let's just note though that he does not add Josh Rosen into this conversation. He leaves Josh Rosen out, but I don't think you're actually being fair if you do that, because I mean, we traded away significant draft capital to get him a second round pick. He was our second. Anyway, so, but I think that significantly, I mean, you can't leave it out. I can't imagine how you leave it out. But that does also significantly drag down the entire draft class. Anyway, so defensive tackle Christian Wilkins in the first round. Wilkins contributed 49 tackles, 23 solo, and 2 sacks, and 30 total pressures in the 16 games he played last season. But the Dolphins allowed the 6th most rushing yards per game, 135.4 in 2019, and had the fewest sacks in the NFL at 23, which was a clear indicator that the defensive front needed to be improved. Absolutely true. And that's why I'm saying it's important that you have full context. So you can't just say that Christian Wilkins did great. He led all rookie defensive tackles in tackles. Yeah, but why? It's because he failed at his initial job and couldn't get the ball carrier down or stop the play within, at or behind the line of scrimmage. But he, to his credit, did keep up with the play and went and, cleaned up and, got tackles later. Anyway, so let's see. The additions of Shaq Lawson, Emmanuel Ogbah, and Raekwon Davis, the team's 2020 second-round pick, should help Miami's defensive front improve and ease some of the load on Wilkins' shoulders. Should. I like how he uses should because theoretically, on paper, we have certainly upgraded. And I would say realistically, those players are upgrades from what we had last season because our entire team was a practice squad, essentially, or an expansion team. So I think it will translate into some slightly better numbers. But I don't think it's going to be a massive improvement, or I mean, it might even be similar numbers. I think we'll probably win, maybe 6 games if there's a full season to be played. But I don't think we're going to see some massive jump that everybody's expecting. And in fact, especially considering a lot of the potential issues, like an entirely new staff and new, players, new schemes, all of that stuff, still very young and inexperienced, what have you. And the fact that the offseason is very hindered. They're not getting a lot of that real good, in-person, face-to-face time, etc. A lot of these problems could actually, and they do have a tough schedule. You guys know how I feel about that. I don't put a ton of stock into that, but it is a data point to be to take into consideration, and it matters more when you're actually in the season and you have data on how the teams have done in this current season and what they will project to do against you, etc., etc. Anyway, so but when you take all of that context into your evaluation, I mean, there's even a possibility for regression. They could even lose more games, right? Anyway, so we'll see what happens. Because there's a lot of things that we don't know yet. There's gonna be injuries. Who gets injured, right? We don't know how any of these new draft picks are gonna perform, right? So when's Tua gonna go in? All these different things. Anyway, so let's continue on and finish with Wilkins. The hope is that this former Clemson standout will prove he's more than a role player in year 2. I mean, if he's not more than a role player, then that's pretty disastrous for your number round pick from 2019. So he absolutely has to prove that. So he skips Josh Rosen, goes to offensive guard Michael Dieter. Just real quick about Rosen. I mean, look, I've said it a bunch of times. I think he can still be a good quarterback in this league. At this point, he's trending more towards, bust or just backup. And he's certainly because, but it's not his fault, right? He got dealt terrible hands. I thought it was stupid for the Dolphins to give up that draft capital and get him. I didn't think it was going to work out, for a number of reasons. But he also, has things that he still needs to work on, but has also developed bad habits, some additional bad habits because of that bad hand that he was dealt. And so if he is going to succeed, it's not going to be with the Dolphins, and he needs to go someplace where he has a solid team around him and where he can get comfortable and, really feel himself and play as himself again. But unfortunately, you know, look, and if you don't count him in the draft class, I mean, I think that's foolish, but whatever. Anyway, let's move on, though. Offensive guard Michael Dieter, 3rd round pick. The Dolphins possessed one of the worst offensive lines in the NFL last year and arguably one of the worst in franchise history. Dieter started 15 of 16 games on that line last season. Dieter allowed 6 sacks, which tied him for 2nd most in the NFL among guards, and he wasn't much help when it came to run blocking. There's hope that he'll take a major step forward in his 2nd season, but the additions of Eric Flowers and rookies Robert Hunt and Solomon Kinley will make it a challenge for him to remain a starter. Alright, a couple quick things about that. First of all, you guys already know that I think he was complete fucking trash and played like it, right? And I thought that the way they handled the last draft was totally mishandled, etc., 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 right? Obviously, you would hope. But look at the guys. They brought in a bunch of guys, including a few drafted players, or a couple drafted players. 3 drafted players altogether on the offensive line, which partly suggests that he's probably going to get pushed down the... I honestly think at some point he'll likely get cut. Maybe not this season, but I'm not so sure that Michael Dieter, I mean, he has to make like substantial improvement because he's just not good. He's just not good at all. Anyway, or at least he wasn't in his first season. But that goes to show you, and I mean, they brought in Eric Flowers and way overpaid for him. So, I mean, look, you know, it's shaping up to that they already think that, hey, you know, I mean, unless this guy like really blows us away, we're not even really sold on him anymore, right? So that's not very encouraging from my perspective, but I mean, you know, he could improve. We'll just have to wait and see. I personally don't see it. And then, but let's also note though, I mean, because, and to the Brian Flores thing, look, he fired his offensive line coach a week into training camp because he wouldn't put Michael Dieter and another rookie, which we'll talk about in a minute, Shaq Calhoun, in the game. Shaq Calhoun actually turned out to be all right and one of the better offensive linemen you had, yet he mysteriously kept pulling him out of the game and putting him on the inactives list. But he would not take Dieter out of the game. 15 to 16 games he was in there. He was garbage. He got pulled for like a half a second and you know, for like for one game, and then went right back in because last year, the plan was to lose a lot, okay? Now, they got to have to this point, they got to have their cake and eat it too. They didn't have to lose enough games, all the games, to be the number 1 spot because they were still fortunate enough to be able to get Tua at 5, the one quarterback that they absolutely wanted, point blank, bottom line, period, because they got fortunate because he had a massive injury, which I personally don't see as fortunate, but they did, right? Because he fell to them at 5 and they're able to have their cake and eat it too, as long as it works out. Anyway, but to Michael Dieter, I don't see it, and I think he's likely to be one of those guys that ends up getting cut. Anyway, let's continue on. Linebacker Andrew Van Ginkel, 5th round. The former Wisconsin standout only played in 6 games with 1 start last season because of a foot injury that forced him to start the season on injured reserve, so the first half of the season. When he was cleared to play, Van Ginkel made minimal impact on defense, contributing 15 tackles, 4 for loss, 1 sack, 4 quarterback hits, and forced 1 fumble. So, look, that's why I said he showed some splash plays, and if you extrapolate that over the course of an entire season, if you just double that, I mean, that's 30 tackles, 8 for a loss, 2 sacks, 8 quarterback hits, and 2 forced fumbles. Now, there's no guarantee that he's going to do that over, you know, that's just projections, right? So there's no guarantee that he would do that. He likely would not have done that at the beginning of the season, even if he started, because of how, you know, bad we were, no chemistry, etc., etc. But and then he did have like 2 or 3, you know, splash plays on special teams as well. But this shows you, the stats show you it was minimal impact. He was definitely one of the you know, standout players on the practice squad team that we had and a carryover that was intriguing and has upside. Those things are true, but it is also true that his impact was minimal. Now, hopefully, though, he will improve. However, it is also interesting, though, that I thought the linebacker unit was actually one of the more stable units going in, but then they bring in, Kyle Van Noy, and a couple guys, right? I lost track of like all the different things that they did, but they brought in some guys that are going to be, so that room got fuller, right? I thought it was already pretty full and it got even fuller. So we'll have to see how that pans out. But he does absolutely need to take some steps forward. Where he fits in moving forward depends on what role he can carve out for himself in Miami's hybrid defense. He'll likely compete with Vince Beagle to be the blitzing linebacker in Miami's pressure packages. Fullback Chandler Cox, 7th round. Cox played sparingly as a rookie, primarily contributing on special teams despite making 3 starts. He didn't get a single carry in the running game or catch a single pass in 2019, but a lot of the blame for his lack of involvement can be placed on the offense. It will be interesting to see how Cox's game and the fullback role evolves in new coordinator Chan Gailey's offense. However, Cox's roster spot isn't guaranteed because linebacker Landon Roberts and Wilkins can fill the fullback role based on their past experiences playing that position. Okay, let's stop there though. Because Chandler Cox, okay, it is true that he didn't have a touch or a catch. True. However, there is some nuance to that, right? So, yes, and it was partly because the offense was garbage, but there's more than just that, right? So, one, there was a portion of the season, a lot of it where where he was inactive. So they decided to keep him out of the game, right? And even in situations, right? Like, so he mentioned how Christian Wilkins has the previous experience. But we already went over the fact that he was pretty terrible at his primary job, that is stopping the ball carrier at or behind the line of scrimmage. He did a solid job at then recovering and helping to clean things up, which is not particularly great overall, but does show the effort and so on and so forth. So that is a plus to him. But then they put him in at fullback when they have a fullback, so he could have caught that touchdown pass. That could have been a stat for Chandler Cox, but they decided to put Christian Wilkins in, and he nearly fumbled it. To his credit, he technically didn't. I mean, technically he did. He dropped the ball, but he caught it in the end zone, so it didn't really matter anyway, and then he recovered it, so it didn't matter anyway. But my guess is likely Chandler Cox would not have done that, only on the assumption that he's taken so many more reps in catching the ball, because fullbacks actually are expected to maybe do that occasionally, whereas defensive tackles are not. And yes, Landon Roberts does have experience with that. Both last year, in fact, we employed him in a situation where he caught a pass. Another situation where that actually could have been a stat for Chandler Cox. But additionally, he's a linebacker, right? So why are you drafted this guy, right? And additionally, though, when he was in the game, he did help spring some good runs and showed some potential, right? And showed some solid things. It's funny though, because I'd have to go back. I could have sworn he had a catch or something like that. But anyway, regardless, I mean, what I recall from the season is the few times he was in, he showed some solid play, at least enough to warrant them, I would think, putting him in those situations where you actually expect to use a fullback and have him catch a pass. Because again, I mean, it's a lot more likely that a fullback is going to practice catching passes than it is a defensive tackle, especially, or even a linebacker. I mean, it's a little bit more likely for a linebacker, obviously, but especially a defensive tackle. Anyway, but whatever. We'll see how that goes. Tailback Myles Gaskin, 7th round. Gaskin, a former Washington standout, spent most of the 2019 season watching and learning before getting an opportunity to play in the final 7 games. He got 36 carries, gaining 133 yards, 3.4 per attempt, and scoring 1 touchdown, and caught 7 passes for 51 yards. Like I said, he was okay. Right, when he did come in, they had him out for most of the time. Right, they just left him on inactives most of the year, and when he did come in, he was okay. Right, and so that's part of it, right? So like some of these guys, when they did come in, yeah, maybe they made a handful of flashy plays or whatever, or did a couple things all right, but they were also on a team of like practice squad players essentially. So the bar wasn't exactly very high either. Let's see. He'll be competing with 5 other tailbacks to determine who makes the 53-man roster, regular season roster, as Jordan Howard and Matt Breida's backups. Honestly, I mean, I would think with like Patrick Laird you have there. I don't know. I mean, I think Myles Gaskin will probably has at this point probably more sticking power than Kalen Ballage. I think Ballage is probably more likely to get cut. In part because he was terrible last season, but also in part because he was from the previous regime. So, I think he'll probably, stay around, but he's got a lot to prove as well. Let's see, receiver Gary Jennings, Seattle's 4th round pick. Jennings, who was claimed off waivers in November, played in 1 game for the Dolphins before going on injured reserve, another injured player. During his collegiate career, he was a savvy receiver who started 22 games for West Virginia, mostly in the slot. Jennings is one of 11 receivers competing to be one of the 5 or 6 on Miami's 53-man roster, and he could separate himself from the pack by carving out a role for himself as the Dolphins slot receiver. He is interesting, has some upside, could end up on the practice squad. We'll see. Cornerback Ken Webster, another guy that is interesting to me, has some upside, had like a couple flashy plays, but also had a ton of pretty bad mistakes as well. New England's 7th round pick. Webster started 5 of the 8 games he played for Miami in 2019 after the Dolphins claimed him off waivers at the end of training camp. He contributed 19 tackles and broke up 1 pass last season, and 15 of 26 passes thrown were completed on him. He'll be among a handful of reserves competing for one of the 5 or 6 cornerback spots on Miami's 53-man roster. Receiver Preston Williams, again, to me, one of the top standouts for sure, I would say. Williams flashed a ton of talent and upside in the 8 games he started as a rookie, catching 32 passes for 428 yards and scoring 3 touchdowns before tearing his ACL and his left knee. Considering he was getting better as the 2019 season progressed, it's possible that Williams will pick up where he left off when his 9-12 rehabilitation has concluded. If he can regain his speed and mobility, the 6'5" receiver will likely remain a starter, but he'll need to master Chan Gailey's offense. It's not just his speed and mobility, though, that's important. And this is part of the reason why the ACL injury is huge for him, because he's a go up and get it type of receiver, right? So that means he needs to be able to regain his vertical as well. He's going to need to be able to spring. He's going to need to be able to get up in the air so that way he can body defenders. Go up, get over their head, elevate, high point the ball, and come down with it. That's one of the things that, again, makes him, in that Devontae Parker mold, right? And is part of his game. So it's not just his speed and mobility. Those things are obviously going to be very important. But he's got to be able to go up and get the ball. And then obviously he does have to, master the offense as well. Cornerback Nick Needham, undrafted. Needham rose up from the Dolphins practice squad to become Miami's only reliable starting cornerback last season, obviously after, Xavier Howard. He contributed 54 tackles, 2 interceptions, 1 forced fumble, and broke up 11 passes in 2019. Like I said, a ton of upside, but he also got burned a few times, let up some touchdowns, had some issues. And some pretty costly penalties as well. But Needham needs to improve his coverage since he allowed 44 receptions on the 77 targets he was defending, 57% last season. The addition of Byron Jones and Noah Igbenogene, one of Miami's 3 2020 first-round picks, and the return of Xavier Howard indicates that Needham will have an uphill battle to remain a starter. I think that's unquestionable, but I think that Needham is like a 3rd to 5th cornerback on your roster anyway. but he's a good option somewhere between 3 to 5, right? So, and I would expect him to stay on the roster, but he does have a lot of improvements. Tailback Patrick Laird, he was one of the more intriguing. He definitely, to me, was the best running back that we had on the roster last season. And you know what? Now that I think about it, I'm pretty sure Chandler Cox didn't actually get any opportunities from my memory. It's Patrick Laird that I was thinking. They just kept taking him out of the game every time he started breaking like good runs and shit like that. It was maddening, except for the fact that they were not really trying to win many games. Anyway, Laird began the season as a special teams contributor, but eventually earned playing time on offense. His 2.7 yards per carry, 168 rushing yards on 62 carries average was disappointing, but he was a threat in the screen game, gaining 204 yards on 23 passes, which was the second most of any rookie tailback in the NFL last season. Pause there real quick. So it is true that he only had a 2.7 average. I think that now he was a rookie, and the offensive line and the offense were terrible. I think with a better offense, better offensive line, more time in the game, because he didn't get a ton of reps either. I think with all of those things improved, the flashes that he showed, because he did have some like nice and impressive and like ooh moment kind of runs, right? So I think if all of that stuff can improve, I think he will prove to be a very useful back. Not necessarily a 3-down back, but he could certainly be like, a 3rd down kind of back or whatever, maybe in some like gadget plays, trick plays, but also definitely good in the screen game and in the pass game. So he could be an option that's thrown in that rotation with the Jordan Howard and Matt Breida combination. And I really love him I would really love him as the 3rd tailback behind those guys personally. Let's see. Laird will compete with 5 other tailbacks to determine who makes the roster as Howard and Breida's backup. Offensive guard Shaq Calhoun, undrafted. Really? I could have sworn we actually drafted this guy. Anyway, Calhoun started 7 games and played 471 offensive snaps last season as a reserve guard. The former Mississippi State standout allowed 2 sacks and committed 2 penalties in his limited action. But that's obviously significantly less than Dieter, yet he was the one that was pulled out on it was like 3 occasions or 4 games where they decided to put him on in the inactives list, and that's why he only part of the reason why he only started 7 games. But he ended up being one of the better, but they just would leave Dieter in and, kept taking him out. Anyway, he was one of Miami's better run-blocking linemen, but the Dolphins produced a franchise low in rushing yards last season because the whole line was garbage. But he was definitely one of the better run-blocking offensive linemen and, proved to be even better, like I said, than Dieter and some of the other guys in pass blocking. But anyway, whatever. Let's see. The additions made to the offensive line this offseason will make this a competitive camp for young players like Calhoun. That is true. Offensive lineman Keaton Sutherland, undrafted. Sutherland started 2 of the 3 games he played for the Dolphins after joining the team in late September. He played a total of 93 offensive snaps, so it is difficult to provide a thorough assessment of the former Texas A&M standout. Expect Sutherland to compete for a spot as a backup swing guard and center during camp. I think that's true. Cornerback Nate Brooks. The Dolphins signed Brooks off the Patriots practice squad in December, and he contributed 10 tackles and 2 pass deflections in the 3 games he played. 8 of the 13 passes thrown to receivers he was defending were completed. He'll be among a handful of reserves competing for one of the 5 or 6 cornerback spots on Miami's roster. All true. Cornerback Tay Hayes. Miami claimed Hayes off waivers in December, and the former Appalachian State standout played in 2 games, contributing 7 tackles and 2 pass deflections. He'll be among a handful of reserves competing for the one of the 5 or 6 spots. True. Tight end Chris Myarick. He was intriguing to me. I liked this guy. He showed some flashes that could be a good number 2 option behind Gesicki as far as a pass catching tight end. For me, and a guy I would like to see in that mix and in that room this upcoming season. Myarick came on strong at the end of the exhibition season, but spent all 2019 on Miami's practice squad. The Dolphins signed Clive Walford, who was real hit or miss instead of promoting him up to the 53-man roster late last season, this camp he'll have another chance to compete with Durham Smythe and Michael Roberts for one of the 2 tight end roles behind Mike Gesicki. Offensive guy, I would like to see, personally, I would like to see it be Gesicki, Smythe, and Myarick, but I obviously don't make those decisions. Offensive guard, Duval Queiroz Neto. Queiroz Neto, a Brazilian import who was allocated to Miami as part of the International Player Pathway Program, initially began his NFL career as a defensive tackle, but he was moved to offensive guard during the season, and that's where he'll spend his time practicing during training camp. I didn't even know that, but, I mean, he is going to be, again, at the very least, I would think, on the Dolphins practice squad again this season, because they were given the exemption, so they can have him on the practice squad as the 11th player, because the teams get exemptions for overseas players that come over. They can have one. Anyway, so I would expect him to still be there, but he's got a long way to go if he's going to fight up that offensive line depth. Anyway, okay, so I know that was kind of long. That was a lot there, but there was a lot of good information that I wanted to share with you guys about the actual, he put in a lot of good stats from these guys, and I thought that he did a solid assessment of pretty much all of those players, with some minor disagreements in there, but overall I thought it was solid and definitely a good look at last year's imports, i.e. their draft picks and the undrafted guys that they brought in, etc. But unfortunately, the problem is there is a lot left to be desired, and they absolutely have to take significant steps forward, because as it stands right now, that draft class in particular is not very good. So anyway, with that, I'm going to get up out of here. I hope you guys enjoy my videos and my perspective. I hope you appreciate it. If you do, make sure you hit the subscribe button. Make sure you hit the like button. Make sure you hit the bell if you want to get the alerts. Share my channel and videos with your friends and family. Leave your questions, comments, and concerns down in the comment section. And of course, as always, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Dillon Tartaro. And with that, I am out. I'll see y'all soon. Phins up.